Granddad never mentioned that there were men as dark as this. Wow, look at that nose. He's just like a pig. He's a monster! Hut!
So, in today's episode, I'm joined by JT Tran of ABCs of Attraction. You were in Natalie Tran's White Male, Asian Female documentary. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So, my first question is in regards to White Male, Asian Female. In your opinion, why is that particular pairing so controversial?
Well, that's the thing. You know, white male, Asian female relationships haven't been controversial, and it's only been in like recent times has there been more critical analysis of it. I mean, if you look back historically speaking, in America, there were the anti-miscegenation laws where Asian men, you know, Chinese men specifically, could not marry outside of their race, and Asian women they were prevented from coming over. And so you had like these kind of Chinese male ghettos. And then obviously you had colonialism in Japan and China and Southeast Asia with white male soldiers, you know, stationed overseas and bringing over like mail order brides. And that continued for the longest time. And it's only been recently where I guess Asians and specifically Asian men have spoken up more about this imbalance in the power dynamic, right? Where it goes beyond just like yellow fever, white fever to recognize that, hey, yes, imperialism, colonialism plays a part, but it's also, you know, some women, not all Asian women, but some, you know, it's more than just love. Like part of it is, hey, you know what? White privilege is a hell of a drug, right? So it's just recent times where some are being asked to answer some critical questions, and it upsets some people.
Okay. And if you could elaborate further on why is it that Asian men are speaking about it now, or like why they may be angry about this particular pairing?
Well, it's achieved a bit more of a critical mass because I know growing up, there really wasn't a lot of positive Asian male representation. A lot of it was, you know, if it came from Asian background, it was usually like an Asian woman. For example, if you look at the Joy Luck Club, right, which was by Amy Tan, and it was a breakthrough. I remember this specifically being kind of a watershed moment in Asian American literature and film, but it was two steps back for Asian men of how they portrayed us as like, you know, abusive fathers and husbands or whatever, right? And so we grew up with that. And even now, if you look at the, you know, Asian American literature between men and women, there's a profound difference, right? Asian American female literature is still the same. If you look at To All the Boys I Loved Before, you know, where Asian men are basically just either erased or they're displayed as the stereotype of like Long Duck Dong in, you know, in To All the Boys I Loved Before. But then you have Crazy Rich Asians, which portrayed Asian Americans, both male and female, as three-dimensional human beings, right? Where Asian Americans were being more politically woke, if you will, while Asian American women are still, you know, for 2-3 generations have been espousing, it goes back to, hey, Asians, we are uniquely misogynistic compared to everybody else. Like, we are uber misogynists.
Okay.
So...
Amy Tan in the Joy Luck Club, I think there's a white guy there that's named Rich, kind of putting into that stereotype of white men having money and status, and Amy Tan is in a white male Asian female relationship. And into All the Boys I Loved Before, yeah, there are no Asian men, but most of the people that Lena Condor is going after are white guys, and there's like one token black guy. So there is that. I know with Asian men, it's not necessarily a comfortable subject to talk about men of other races being interested in Asian women, but I did want to point out that it's not, I guess, just you know, everybody's against Asian men when it comes to dating Asian women. Like, we face stereotypes as black and Hispanic men too to date Asian women that are also unique. While they're different, they're kind of in the same because white men seem to be the prime target for Asian women. I don't know if you agree with that.
I mean, it goes back to white privilege. I mean, someone that has white privilege is going to have obviously an added advantage compared to someone that doesn't, especially in the dating arena. I mean, the multiple studies. And then you see like the dating outmarriage statistics, it is usually predominantly Asian women, mostly to white men. I think the backlash and the critical questions that are being asked, it isn't about Asian women and black men or Asian women and Latin men. At least from my perspective, I don't see that. It is specifically like, why is it that 90% of those marriages are to white men, right? It isn't like Hispanic men or black men have, you guys aren't rolling in white privilege. So, it's a question that has to be raised, right? It's like, isn't it just love? Because like, it's obviously gravitating towards one area.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen or heard of any instances of non-white men being rejected by Asian women for white men?
I've seen, heard, just kind of like anecdotally, if say like an Asian woman wasn't into a black guy, right? But I've also seen the reverse, like an Asian woman being into specifically black guys. But not anywhere where if they had a choice, I guess, and again, I'll be honest, I don't necessarily hang out with a lot of Asian women. I've dated a few, but the majority of I hang out with is like my fellow Asian brothers. So. Okay.
So here's a question that I had a lot of context for, so might be a little while, but I think it's important to bring it in. There were 3 Asian women that were mentioned in the beginning of Natalie Tran's documentary. Jamie Chung, Anna Akana, and Constance Wu, who've all been harassed for dating white men. But what was interesting was that Jamie Chung has been in many white male Asian female movies, has a white husband. Constance Wu was at the Women's March talking about the objectification of Asian women, but she said, hey, on Twitter, playing a mail order bride is okay if they make enough money. The actress does, and she's dated a white guy. And Anna Akana has been very vocal about yellow fever, and on her channel, she made a video about it. But now that the roles reversed, she's talking about love is love on Twitter, and they shouldn't be harassed for dating Asian women. Asian women shouldn't be harassed for their dating preferences. I also want to mention that there's this narrative, I guess, of Asian women blaming white men for having a preference for Asian women. There was an article written by Maggie Lamb called Fucking White Boys, which was kind of weird to make a title like that. And Eliza Romero pointed this out in an article called Dear Asian Woman, I'm Calling You Out on This One, saying maybe some Asian women have a white boy fetish and they're blaming it on the dudes. So that's the context. The question is that because Asian women have been condemning men for yellow fever or liking Asian women, but they have a racial dating preference of their own, is the anger towards white male Asian female more geared towards the weird dynamics behind those relationships, or Asian women hypocritically condemning men for their dating preferences only to have dating preferences of their own?
Well, it's like sort of a form of like white virtue signaling, right? It's like, oh, don't date me because I'm Asian, but I date white guys, right? Yeah. And again, there's nothing wrong with dating white males, but it does sort of like, to use the analogy, if you're someone who is green, right? And you're all about saving the earth, and you drive like a Humvee, a Hummer, and you take private jet planes. I mean, are you really green if you do that, right? And so, like, for me, I think Jamie Chung was the one who's like, ever since I was a little girl, I wanted to have like half Asian babies. I think she said that on Instagram, right? So that sort of dream of hers was very early on. And so you can detect that maybe that sort of conditioning happened to her. But at the same time, like with Constance Wu, I think she's a woke Asian woman where she is probably not knowing her personally, but still cognizant of that maybe her preferences, there's something at play, but she's aware of it when she chooses to date somebody, right? And so you're right in the fact that, yes, there are a lot of white guys that have yellow fever, but it takes two to tango, right? It takes like a group of women like, hey, you know what? Being paid more money when I take on a white name, being in a physically safer space, when I'm with a white person, having achieved more social status, political status, more police protection when I'm in a white household. Like, realistically, that's a huge incentive, right, to have a white partner, and there's no denying that, right? So yeah, there's both yellow and white fever, but I think that Asian women that do date white can be woke and can be like allies to men and women, people of color, so long as they recognize and examine themselves. Are their internalized racial preferences playing a part, or can they sort of like make an honest decision and evaluation about that?
Okay. But just to, I guess, go a little bit further, do you think that, I mean, I know Asian women may have their opinions on this, but do you think that maybe they're angry, people or men are angry towards, like, seeing Asian women date white men have low status, for example, or like Asian women yelling at men for saying yellow fever and then just not holding themselves responsible for dating solely white men?
Okay, maybe I'm not quite understanding the question.
Yeah, the context was very long, but I wanted to bring that in for the sake of whoever will be watching. So I asked in the beginning, why is white male Asian female so controversial? I'm asking now, like, what would you think the main reason would be? The issues surrounding those particular couples, like possibly like Constance Wu saying, or playing into Asian stereotypes, for example, like playing a mail order bride for a white guy? Or is it that in the beginning Asian women said it's not okay to like Asian women because they're Asian, and then now that they're only dating men because of their race, they don't see that there's hypocrisy in that, and they're not acknowledging that hypocrisy?
Well, I think a lot of it definitely has that acknowledgement and just the rising sort of status of Asian women. I mean, they've done multiple studies where Asian women are contacted more by white men than even other white women, right? And when you have that sort of pedestal or podium and you don't acknowledge that, then you see this in stars and athletes and stuff like that, then they're definitely like finger pointing like, hey, you have this privilege, then you should help everybody else out, or at least acknowledge your privilege, right? And that's something that hypocrisy is definitely more glaring in today's day and age, because the mail order bride doesn't happen as much anymore, right? The majority of Asian women, white men, is American-born Asian women. It's like 54%. So yeah, like, you got like armed servicemen in Tokyo and Japan and Korea, but the majority of marriages are now to American-born Asian women.
Okay.
So it's not, I mean, it's not like, like it's like when it was like armed servicemen bringing home a Asian woman that couldn't speak English and therefore could not communicate her needs to the community and the American community, right? So like it's now Americanized, American-born Asian women who are like, oh, look at me, I'm married to a white guy and I'm technologically connected, right? So that it's spread more. It is more pronounced and more in your face than it was in the 1950s and 60s when, soldiers were coming back with Korean brides.
Yeah. It's a different game, I guess, a different era. In terms of non-white men getting rejected by Asian women, what do you think can be done to overcome whatever stereotypes or barriers that both Asian men and Black, Hispanic, Indian men may face when it comes to white male, Asian female?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Are there strains of prejudice in the Asian community? For sure. I think, the fact that you can sort of just look at the outmarriage rate, there definitely seems to be a little bit of, preference definitely for white guys. As to actual mechanics or techniques, I think the way I teach my students is if you're going into an Asian group it is more preferable going what we call like an indirect style, right? Where you ingratiate yourself, introduce yourself to the friends, and then getting the peer group approval, and then meeting her or focusing on her, and that way she isn't being condemned or slut shamed or race shamed by her friends, because you have won over the group first and then concentrated on attracting her.
Okay. So that's like the most effective way?
I would say so, because it's more indirect. Like white guys, you don't really have to do that. But I've had like black students, and if they were trying to go what I call like a direct style, it just wouldn't work. It would just like freak some people out, because it's like, oh, it's like, a little bit too much.
Yeah.
So, basically winning over the social circle, the peer group, right? So, because there is going to be a lot of like social shaming, slut shaming, race shaming going on. Even when it was like, I remember for me, it was like I was hooking up with a white girl that was part of an Asian sorority, and her Asian sisters were race shaming her for being with me, an Asian guy. She was a white girl, and it was an Asian sorority. So you can imagine what would go on between a bunch of Asian girls, and if you're a black guy or white or Hispanic guy going in.
Yeah.
If it was a white guy, they'd be like, you go, girl. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really strange. Like it's okay for them to outdate or outmarry, but if an Asian guy does it, then it's okay. Like, it's ridiculous. A couple more questions. This about just advice, again, overall. What do you have to say to non-white men, particularly Asian men, who are like in that deep MRA and maybe even sometimes incel category, who are just done with this whole white male Asian female thing, and they just don't want to date anymore? What advice would you have for them?
Well, for those who have gotten into that kind of MRA, like red pill, first of all, those aren't conducive communities for Asian Americans or just Asian men in general. I mean, they're just they're not even one step removed from like the alt-right, like kind of, crowd. It's very, by its very nature is very exclusion of men of color. I prefer more like the yellow pill, so to speak, where it's about, being successful because you're an Asian man and not in spite of it. That there are solutions, right, to Asian men being able to date whomever they want, whether it's white women, black women, Hispanic women. If you look at the outmarriage rate, is like 20%. Now, is it low? Yeah. I mean, it's like white men, black men are like 24, 26, 28. We're like in the low end, but we're not we're not like a magnitude off. All right. So, there are solutions to it. I obviously teach, a lot of that, and, my students are successful, whether they want to marry white women or Asian women, right? And it's important for them to pursue their happiness and also understand that there are solutions to it. It is not by any measure impossible. Is it slightly more difficult? Yes. But as I always say, it's like, if I can do it, I'm like 5'5", short, unattractive Asian guy. If I can do it, you can do it.
What do you have to say to Asian women who date white men for the wrong reasons, such as to date up or for status?
Well, first of all, I want to say, like, every Asian woman can date whomever they want. That's not the criticism. The criticism is simply when they aren't taking into factor the possibility that internalized racism might be playing a part, that the search for, or the unconscious search for white privilege might be playing a part. It doesn't play a part by every single relationship, obviously, but I think it's important to recognize that it could. And even if you have a relationship with a white man that isn't based on white privilege, understand that that isn't something that's true in like society writ large. Just because you aren't, intentionally benefiting from white privilege, the fact that you're still married to a white guy means you benefit from white privilege, right?
Yeah.
It's like, maybe you didn't want that power, but you got it now.
Yeah.
So don't be a hypocrite and say you don't have it.
Yeah. Of course. My last question may be a little bit redundant, but I'll ask it anyways. overall, what advice would you give to men who feel as though they're struggling with women, regardless of what race that they are, to do better in the dating game?
Like practical advice, I would say that there is a lot of things that you can do to raise your sexual market value, right? That is one of the great things about being a man, that I can raise myself with, hygiene, fashion, body language, a lot of nonverbal communication. I'm not going to become like Brad Pitt, but I can get to that like 5, 6 level, right? Within the dateable range. And then through the use of my own charisma, personality, confidence, and ability, go from that 5 or 6 up to like 7 and 8, right? It is an actual skill set. Is it part luck? Sure. Like human beings we are like, a unique combination of infinite variables, but we can stack the deck in our favor. And this is a unique ability that exists with men that doesn't really exist with women, right? Women, that they are genetically born with the beauty or not, right? If you just look at the sexual market value of a woman's peaks when she's young and beautiful, and then starts going with a little bit in the 20s, but then after that goes down, and that's the tyranny of the sexual market value, and it's terrible and it's unfair to women. But at the same time, my sexual market value can increase with experience and status and resources. So there is a solution to all of this. This is the 21st century. We literally live in a time where we are the most powerful generation of men that has ever existed. Ever. Right? There's no other generation before us that was equally or even close to being as powerful as we are. Every piece of knowledge and ability is at our fingertips. I mean, if you're the fact that you're watching this on YouTube right now, answering some of your questions and concerns and political discourse and maybe internal angst, means you have the power at your fingertips.
It's good advice. But I also just wish that the toxic white male Asian female / yellow fever, but I only date white men talking points would go away. Those are all my questions. If you had anything else to add, feel free. Otherwise, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, and to any Asian brothers out there that are watching this, I would definitely say the go-to tactic is what I call going direct, where you're showing yourself as a masculine, romantic, sexual human being, breaking her heuristic thinking so that she evaluates you as a romantic person, right? As opposed to just being another friend zone or, God forbid, like an asexual, effeminate Asian guy. So that's my piece of advice to my Asian brothers out there.